I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And there you go, the words of our 47th President-elect Donald Trump, victorious after a historic night, election night. We live in a blue state of Washington, but a red wave took over most of the Midwest and the East Coast. A stunning win for Trump. Looks like he'll win the popular vote as well. Republicans also took back the Senate. They'll keep the House. Locally, Democrats held strong, and it appears there will soon be a new progressive voice on the city council. So we have a lot to cover here. We're discussing these topics and so much more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I am a host on the Seattle channel, and the views expressed here are mine. My co-host David Croman is on leave, that lucky devil, and so I'm very happy to have with me Nick Licata, former Seattle City Council member whose Citizenship Politics website is a great look at political issues on the national scene. And Nick, I feel like I'm going to ask a lot of people this question this week. How are you doing?
Actually, given the results, I'm doing fine. I've always been optimistic, and as I've been reading other commentators, they're basically saying this is not the end of democracy. We have a strong democracy, and we will go forward.
All right. I like that optimism, Nick. I appreciate you being here. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They, of course, on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks always to my show patrons supporting me through some tough times at Seattle Channel, where it looked like I might lose my job for a minute. If you haven't heard, the funding is back for 2 years. I like it, Nick. I like that laughter. The long-term funding plan, I'm going to have to keep you posted on that. If you want to be a patron, you get a cool decal like this one. You can also access Patrons First content before anyone else and more. So please support the show on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. A big thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get going with Right Here, Right Now. Nick, I've been reading avidly the work you've been doing on citizenship politics about the Trump playbook to win. There were 100 pre-filed lawsuits from the Republican National Committee to eliminate ballots with errors and other possible irregularities. But I'm not even sure the result we saw from election night was in the Trump playbook. He took the Electoral College vote decisively. Looks like he's on his way to the popular vote win, too. Can you frame up for us what happened on election night?
Right. Well, I think one of the details that some of the, commentators and people looking at the numbers are identifying is that Vice President Harris did worse in the Democratic urban strongholds than Biden did, and did worse in the sense that Trump increased his percentage and she underperformed in areas that Biden did very well in. I think there was a major difference between those two campaigns, and with strategies, really. Mm-hmm. Biden was very clear that, to borrow a quote from James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. And he really focused on that. He tied cultural issues to economic impact. Whereas I believe that when you look at what Harris was doing, she emphasized culture first and then used the economy as a footnote. And the irony here is that although the public and myself often thought of Trump's campaign and the Republican Party pushing a cultural war, in many ways, actually, Harris fell into, I would feel, a narrow road of emphasizing cultural issues, abortion, which is actually
huge issue, yeah.
Yeah, but it's still a cultural issue. It's not economic. It has an economic impact that's difficult to explain. And the cultural freedom of, choosing your sex and the role of trans people. But those, again, are cultural issues. It's difficult to make an economic connection. And I think Trump was very good in doing that. We are still recovering from COVID, okay? Yeah. Technically, it was over, but it has a long tailwind on the economic impact. And I believe that just about anybody who is currently, ending their presidential term would be blamed for the downturn and the increase in inflation. I think in some ways it was a difficult game to win for Harris or anyone who was either the incumbent or running as she was on the incumbent's record. Right. And she probably nailed, as they say, nailed the coffin clause when she said that when asked, I think it was on one of the View programs, how would you differ from Joe Biden? No, she has real loyalty, personal loyalty to
Right. She didn't want to say that she was going to be that much
and
different. Right.
and that is true with just about every vice
Sure.
president. And saying she couldn't think of a difference,
Hmm.
and it reminded me a lot, going way back, to Hubert Humphrey and
Yeah.
Lyndon Johnson.
Hmm.
Humphrey just could not separate himself definitively from Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
And of course, he lost the election.
I want to jump back to the Harris campaign in a little bit, but just to stay with Trump for a minute, the part of it I really need to process, and you can call it a culture war if you want to here, but just so many of these misogynistic messages, his takedown of Roe versus Wade, it really seemed to hit a target in the U.S. Danny Westneat just wrote a piece about this on election night.
Right.
You even had some Republicans saying, hey, Donald Trump, you're pumping up the testosterone too much, but it really worked. He lost the female vote, but he won a lot more men. In Georgia
Yes.
on election night, women backing Harris by 7 points, but men were plus 14 for Trump. Ohio,
Right.
women backed Harris by 5, blown away by men voting for Trump by 18 points. Can you talk about that phenomenon, Nick?
The assumption was that, well, it's a fair assumption, women tend to vote more than men, and the data from polling seem to be more engaged in wanting to get out, more energized to go and vote. Trump's strategy, which I doubt would have worked, and his campaign made a point of it, was to emphasize a boys versus girls campaign.
Yeah.
He pumped up and he tapped into a national mood amongst men of various ethnic groups that they were being underappreciated. And this applied to both Latino as well as black males, not just white males. And the data that's coming out seems to show that Trump increased the percentage, in fact, a historic high point for black and Latino men for a Republican candidate. It was something that, in some ways, one would say is misogynist or is old-fashioned. Trump wasn't moving away from that. And his vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, in fact, pushed hard on it. In fact, I remember he suggested on some programs that, the sexual revolution made it too easy for women to leave a marriage.
Sure.
And talk about whether it's old-fashioned or it's just
childless
narrow.
cat ladies. He brought that up too. Sure.
Right, exactly. So, that's a dynamic that I think took a lot of people by surprise. And maybe it's because I'm one of these people who lives in, we taught like a blue bubble or maybe a liberal mindset, but there's another element to it. It's what I think is more of a rational approach as opposed to an emotional approach. And it doesn't mean that one is good and the other is bad.
Sure.
But they're both part of our human nature, trying to be rational and being emotional.
Interesting.
And I think Trump hit the emotional button more so, even though, Harris was talking about abortion, which is very emotional, but it's the fear element that is what Trump was hitting. And that's the emotional response. The crime. Immigrants are a danger, physical danger to them. Using the word rapist, to me and half the population, seems extreme. In fact, the interesting thing is that even the latest polling shows that 55% of all voters think that Trump is too extreme, and yet he got their votes.
Yeah, and can we jump back to the Harris campaign real quick? Because I know the postmortem will be long and go way past what we're talking about here today. And you've written about some of these ideas, too. There was a piece in early October talking about her need to strengthen her message on Social Security to gain senior voters. Very good piece there. Do you attribute her loss to this kind of lack of focus or clear messaging? I know there's a good vibe behind this campaign for sure, but did it have good messaging? I think that's one big challenge here.
Well, no, I think it had horrible messaging. You can say people hear that and go, "Oh, what do you mean? She did great things on abortion." That's what I'm talking about. It's how you frame the problem. And the example I wrote about before, Social Security income benefits is critical to a large portion of people. In fact, a lot of folks forget there's actually more people who are voting over the age of 65, 70 than there are youth. Okay? It's a much larger group of people. And they tend to vote as well. I went to Trump's website because I heard him talk on TV and I wanted to check what was actually there. And it was very simple. He simply said, we're not going to tax the benefits of Social Security. income.
Yeah.
That's it, period. Now, it doesn't really work numerically because you end up basically endangering Social Security down the road because you're not funding it properly.
Right.
And so, and he didn't really have a plan. That was it,
Yeah.
And Harris on that understood the problem, and she went on to talk about we're going to protect your Social Security
Yes.
and all that Trump believes in is helping the billionaires, not you. But it wasn't a clear message. It was like a long sort of diatribe, maybe a heavy word to use, but it's a long sort of plea, or long sort of broad brushstrokes. It wasn't specific. It wasn't like punch. And that was the thing about Trump. He knows how to, now we would consider a lot of it to be lies, but politicians generally do exaggerate.
Yes.
They cut corners. And he's basically the kind of person who comes right up to the line of lying, but always keeping a little bit of sliver of truth in there that people grasp, that people hold on to.
Sometimes that sliver of truthiness is pretty thin, but I hear what you're saying there, Nick, for sure. I did want to talk about two other pieces in the Harris campaign. She'd only been campaigning for a little over 100 days compared to years' worth for Trump, and then she was not a primary election winner as Trump was. I thought those were two pieces of this that did they play a role here, Nick? I just wanted to talk about how the American people knew her or did not know her. She didn't go through that election vetting process, and I wonder if that was part of it. And it certainly was an abbreviated campaign time for her too.
Right. Well, I know that Trump and his campaign made a big deal about how she was selected by the Democrats and it wasn't Republican. I mean, it wasn't a democratic process, which I think is a phony argument. The Democrats all united behind her, but the Republicans would have loved to see a large convention with Democrats fighting each other. So that would only benefit Republicans.
Okay.
But also, she did have a very short period of time, so there's no doubt about that. And one of the comments that were made again and again in exit interviews is why people voted for Trump was because they didn't know enough about Harris. And they believed that they still weren't sure. Strangely enough, I would say, well, you were sure about Trump. It didn't sound good to me, but for a lot of people, they were sure of Trump, and it's almost like you go with the enemy you know rather than the one you don't know, or something like that. It was sort of like, I mean, they did interviews with people saying, I don't like his personality, but I feel he's going to protect us better because he always said that,
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you repeat the mantra again and again, and people fell into it. Harris did not have enough time to repeat a single mantra, and she was, I think, following in the same missteps that Hillary Clinton.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. Both of them, very, very smart people, not just women, very, very smart people, as was Obama.
Sure.
But the difference between Obama and them, so besides being women and men, by the way, I do think there was a large percentage, we don't know how large, of voters, both men and women, who did not want to have a woman as a president.
Yeah.
The comment was made, again, in one of these exit interviews, was, well, I'm not sure she could be a world leader as a woman, in particular a minority woman. You can mention Margaret Thatcher. You can mention the new president of Mexico.
Open your eyes, U.S. Okay.
But people, for the most part, Americans, are not plugged into foreign affairs, particularly on that level. So the mistake, again, Hillary was making, and I think that Harris was making, was they came off too much as managerial. Good managers who understand how to run a business, understand what the numbers are.
Yeah.
This will work, this won't work. And again, it's the rational versus the emotional. It's a very rational approach.
Yeah.
But most people, in an election particularly, when you have a lot of explosive items, they're more of a gut level sort of response. This is reflected in the interest level across the board. All age groups, all ethnic groups showed a lower interest level in this election. Despite the increase in voter turnout, there was still a low voter interest.
Yeah.
So people sort of went to the ballot, maybe out of obligation or tradition, but they weren't driven, except perhaps the Trump people, out of fear.
Wow. I'm so interested to see more of the breakdown of this election, but I really appreciate those insights there, Nick. I do want to talk about what's happening in our next segment. What's on the to-do list for Donald Trump when he assumes power as our 47th president? Is the U.S. on a trend heading towards a more authoritarian style of government? We're going to pull apart those questions coming up on Now Hear This. Well, if you've been keeping track, our president-elect has vowed to do a few things on his first day in office. He has said he'd be a dictator for a day. He said he wants to close the U.S. border. He wants to be, quote, drilling, talking about oil production. He would fire Jack Smith, the special counsel who indicted him for his role in the January 6th riot, and punish the prosecutors and judges overseeing his multiple criminal cases. As he said in his victory speech, his success is the ultimate unifier.
The success is going to bring us together, and we are going to start by all putting America first. We have to put our country first for at least a period of time. We have to fix it, because together we can truly make America great again for all Americans.
Nick, the president-elect has talked about a lot of day one priorities. Mass deportations of immigrants who aren't here in the U.S. legally, ending Green New Deal programs like increasing wind power production. Is there a part you are most worried about? Because you've written about authoritarianism and the possibility that it could be very real in the U.S.
Well, authoritarianism does exist in a lot of countries. I don't think we're going to be there, okay? Day one with Trump, despite his offhand or serious comment about being dictator for a day.
Yeah.
But you have to keep in mind, he used 400 times while he was president to use the power of making executive decisions that would bypass Congress, okay?
Yes.
All presidents, not all, but in the recent history, have been using executive privilege or executive decisions, orders, much more frequently. It's been a linear graph going up. But again, Trump broke new ground by hitting even a higher level. He will, in his new term, he'll be using those executive orders. For instance, he tried to get the wall built by moving military funds over for something that was a domestic product, domestic feature, which was against basically what Congress had intended. You skim through that. What you're going to see is a lot of challenges to his use of the executive orders going to the courts. Given that all the court cases that are going to be contested or that he gets bad decisions will go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court now has not just 6 conservative judges, but those 6 judges are all prior members or affiliated with the Federalist Society, which is basically a very sort of, lack of a better word, reactionary sort of organization. And they were all selected by Trump's, at that time when he was president, this key advisor. So he has a lock on the court system. They're not going to follow blindly, but they're definitely going to be oriented towards supporting his decisions, regardless of what Congress says.
I just wanted to make sure I threw in there. You're saying we're not on a path towards authoritarianism, but gosh, it sure sounds like it when you start saying things like that.
Well, we're on the path. I don't think we're going to have it overnight.
Sure.
But we are definitely, let me clarify, we are on that path. And, as I wrote in the past, looking at 2 recent democracies.
Yes, Hungary and Venezuela. Excellent piece. Yeah, keep going.
And they were weak democracies. We have a 200-plus year tradition of having a democracy. Both Hungary and Venezuela had democracies that lasted less than 50 years, perhaps even 20. And that's true for the, if you look at Republic in Germany when, the Nazis took over and Russia when Kerensky's government fell. They were all democracies basically built on a deck of cards, really, to fall. That's not going to happen immediately in the U.S. But we could see gradual changes. And my biggest concern, the pundits haven't really been focusing on this, but my biggest concern really is the military. I mean, John Kelly and the ex-chief of staff have pointed some very serious charges towards how Trump does not recognize civilian control of the military, but that the military is not accountable just to the executive, it's accountable to the Constitution. And that means that there's going to be a conflict. And if Trump moves in to have the military do certain things that legal scholars and the public may consider as anti-constitutional, it'll go to the Supreme Court, which will support Trump.
Wow. Thank you so much for this. Nick, I did want to make sure that I drew at least one line here to talk about what's happening in Washington State and locally, because Democrats came out big here in the state of Washington. Yeah. Bob Ferguson is our new governor. I've been keeping an eye on Dave Upthegrove, King County Council Chair, squeaked by the primary with less than 50 votes. He has an early lead over his Republican challenger, former Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, the Republican there. All the Dems are ahead in the statewide races. 3 of the Republican-backed initiatives to end the capital gains tax, to gut the Climate Commitment Act, to allow state residents to opt out of long-term care insurance have failed. One of them, 2066, would stop local governments from banning or discouraging the use of natural gas, had a slim 51-49% lead in election night totals. I just wanted to bring this up, Nick, because
Yes.
how do you look at this phenomenon of such massive support for Democrats here in Washington compared to this wave of Republican support elsewhere in the country? Are we on an island or what?
Well, it is phenomenal. There are other states, and I can't name them, who have had what I would call progressive initiatives, referendums that have passed overwhelmingly. I mean, if you look at I think it was 10 states that had abortion on the ballot, 7 of them passed, and the one in Florida failed because they needed 60%. But in Washington state, I think part of it is that we have good grassroots organizing, not just to get the vote out, which happens, but to educate the public. And I think we have a fairly high informed public.
Okay.
And that, again, was one of the strategies that Trump applied in the election, and successfully, going after what's called low propensity voters. Why?
They don't get out as often, right? Okay.
They don't get out. And why is that? It's not because they're undecided. They don't care for the most part, and they don't necessarily are engaged in the democratic process. But if you can touch a point, the soft point that makes them angry, you can get them out to vote. And that's the strategy he used. I didn't think it was going to be a successful strategy, but it did help him.
Yeah, it did. It did. And it's so interesting to watch how Democrats have been successful in our state. And I did want to mention in Seattle specifically, transportation levy, the biggest in city history. We've talked about it on the podcast, passed with a whopping 66% approval rate. The race for the 1-year term on the city council, the citywide position 8 seat, looking very favorable for Alexis Mercedes Rink, the progressive challenger over incumbent Tanya Wu. 20-second version on this one, Nick, the city council race. Are you seeing a situation where voters maybe want to bring in a different vote to the council? You've got the moderate council members, maybe a more progressive voice here. Some thoughts about Alexis Mercedes Rink and her success?
Yes, it certainly is what is happening. People, as a rule, okay, and that's true of Seattle or any other city, they get disturbed by when something's out of balance. And the council, they felt before this one, I think generally people felt was out of balance. It was a little too progressive. It was a little too risk-oriented.
Yes.
The new council is taking a very strong stand in the opposite direction. And Tanya Wu, Wu was representative of that.
Yeah.
And I think Alexis was coming in and saying, whoa, wait a second. If you read her literature, it wasn't crazy. It wasn't a reflection of, like defund the police or anything like that. No. That's right. Her opponent, Wu, was trying to tag her with that.
Yes.
But it didn't stick because her literature wasn't that way, and she wasn't saying that. Yeah. So I think that this is somewhat of a wake-up call, I think, to the current council members, because they will be coming up for re-election, that they need to give more consideration to, quite honestly, the legacy that they were trying to tear apart of the prior city council.
Indeed.
And they need to backpedal and start being more open-minded.
Okay. All right. We will see what happens on that one. Can't wait to see what's going on next with that piece, and we'll keep you updated on that race too, folks. Coming up, one of our patrons had a question for Nick that I wanted to throw out there. Might be a question you've been thinking about too. We can find out more on this coming up on You Ask, We Answer. So this is You Ask, We Answer, where the podcast features questions from show patrons only. It's a great reason to support the show, and I'm very glad that my patron Eric is back asking questions. The rest of you patrons, why can't you be more like your brother Eric? Make sure you send in some questions to me here. You can email me at seattlenewsviewsandbrews@gmail.com. Thank you very much for your support. But here is Eric's question, Nick. It goes like this. We aren't a swing state. We aren't near any political power centers, and Democrats are in full control of everything in Seattle. National politicians only ever visit to tie up traffic and get money. If you actually want to influence national politics, shouldn't you move to a place where your opinion counts? And Nick, this is where I thought your citizenship politics blood might start boiling when you heard something like this. How do you respond to this, what Eric's asking here?
Well, moving is a big deal.
Yeah, sure, right.
And there are people who live in Texas who don't want to stay in Texas, and
Sure.
I suspect Republicans who don't want to stay in Seattle.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm quite honestly pleasantly surprised. A number of people have left the state to go campaign doorbell. I've
true.
got personal friends who went to Ohio, went to
Pennsylvania, a few I know.
So, I'm not sure how effective it is when you have someone who is not from that state campaigning.
Right.
But doorbelling is important. So you can have an influence outside your state, both by physically going somewhere or just contributing, making contributions to candidates you like. And I'm sure I've done it, and I suspect other people have done it from either party.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I understand what they're saying, right? They tie up the traffic. Why are you here? Well, it's to raise money, quite honestly. We have a lot of multi-millionaires here, so that's why they're here.
Right, right.
But we also can set by example. We set an example with the paid sick leave in Seattle.
Sure, okay.
And also on the minimum wage. Those, after we passed that legislation, and we were one of the first cities in the nation to do that, within 2 years, there were close to 100 other cities passing similar legislation. And many of them looked at Seattle. So leading by example, providing not just a useful role model, but one that works and helps people.
Interesting. So I think this all leads back to your whole idea of how to become a citizen activist. It's a great book, folks. Make sure you also check out becomingacitizenactivist.org. This is the root of who you are, Nick, and I really appreciate it. Can you help us finish up here with why that effort is so important? I know it's a question that you get in many different ways, but why is that effort of being a citizen activist important? Maybe it's a great message to hear here on an election day when people have a lot of questions.
Well, I would define activist as a citizen who is informed, makes an effort to be informed. That's the first step. Okay, it doesn't do any good if you're an activist, and I've seen them on the left and the right.
Yeah.
They really don't know much, but they want to get out, and, and rip up the road or do something.
Right.
So one, it's try to be informed. That's the reason I write all the time. I try to explain things. You can disagree, but at least I try to put in some context.
Yeah.
And also, you have to think of democracy not as an endpoint. It's a process. And that's the process we're going through now. When the process doesn't work anymore, you just don't have democracy. You have something that I believe is worse. Whether you call it authoritarianism or a theological, theocracy, you end up with power being concentrated in a smaller group of people. Okay, democracy will, in the process, it will vary as far as who gets power. It's different groups will have different powers, but the trick to making democracy work is succession, making sure that you have each successive government passing authority on to the next. It's the democratic process.
It is indeed. Nick, I thank you so much for joining me here. I really appreciate being on the podcast.
Well, I appreciate being here. Thank you.
All right. Great to have you with me. That is Nick Licata. Thank you very much for making that happen here. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks to my patrons once again. If you're not a patron, join us. Find the podcast on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you like. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. See you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.